10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 298. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 298 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. So glad to welcome you back in. And we're on to our second month of talking about tritone substitutions. About to get things a little bit more complicated at this point. So before we jump into the show, as usual, just wanted to mention this is a listener-supported podcast. So we do depend on listeners just like you to keep us going. We do not take any advertisements on the show. And instead, we use Patreon for you to give a small monthly donation each and every month. And for that, you do get PDFs and audio examples and all kinds of great jazz education materials that go along with the show and your support. If you would like to become a supporter of the show and get all of those fantastic materials, please go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up today for instant access to all those materials. Quick shout out to some new patrons this week. Thank you to our new $5 patrons, Joel, Madhu, Philippe, and thank you to our new $3 patrons, Joe and A. Thank you guys so much for joining up with the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family. And of course, to the over 350 people we have over there supporting the show, thank you. We could not do this without you. So again, that's 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners. Get yourself signed up today. All right, so this week we are going to continue with our series on the tritone substitution, and we're going to get a little bit more complicated this week. So last month we spent our time talking about how to do a tritone substitution over a long 2-5-1, because first of all, that's the easiest place to start studying that particular sound, and second of all, it's very, very useful. Obviously, we see long 2-5-1 progressions all over the place in jazz standards and compositions, and we study the long 2-5-1 a lot, especially here on this show. We use it as an example for a lot of different concepts. So this time we're going to move on to another essential chord progression, but one that moves by a little bit faster. So it's going to require your knowledge that you've already gained from parts 1 and 2 in this series, and hopefully you've started making some progress on that stuff and you're ready for something that takes a little bit faster thinking and a little bit more putting together of information. So we're going to look at the 3-6-2-5-1 progression, and it's going to be condensed into 2 measures, which means that each one of those chords in the 3-6-2-5 is only going to get 2 beats. So this is going to give us an opportunity to do a little bit more interesting material because we have twice as many chords, but it is going to rely on the exact same concepts that we talked about last time, except we're just going to fit those concepts into a little bit more of a complicated cadence. We're going to fit them over that 3-6-2-5-1 progression. All right, so if you look at your PDF, you're going to notice on the top, I just have the 3-6-2-5-1 progression in the key of concert B flat written out so that we have a base of operations to work from here. So a plain old 3-6-2-5-1 progression sounds like this. Okay, so we have 3 chord, 6 chord, 2 chord, 5 chord, and 1. And we hear this a lot in progressions like rhythm changes, or a lot of bebop tunes contain the 3-6-2-5-1. We can even use this over the blues, which is something we'll be talking about later on in the month. And I hope that studying this progression will be just as useful for you as you found last month's material. All right, so let's look at example number 1. So what I've done is I've subbed out both of the dominant chords at the second half of each measure of the 3-6-2-5-1. So you'll notice I have concert D minor 7, the 3 chord. Then I'm subbing out the concert G7 chord for concert D flat 7, tritone sub. Then I'm moving down to the 2 chord, C minor 7, and then I'm subbing out the 5 chord for the tritone up concert B7 in place of concert F7, and then we resolve to 1. So in effect, our progression sounds like this. And you'll notice there's nice, smooth half-step motion in this particular progression. Now, what I've done is I've prepared a little example for you of myself using these subs, trying to improvise over this a couple times. So let's cut to that now. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the sound of that particular set of subs. And remember, what I'm doing when I'm improvising over this is I'm mostly just using triads and that 1-2-3-5 pattern that we talked about in the first 2 episodes in this series. I'm really not doing much else besides that because I really don't have to. Right? It sounds great when I just use those really, really simple structures over the top of this. All right, let's go on to example number 2. So in example number 2, the first measure is left unchanged. It's 3-6, but then the second measure, I'm subbing out both chords for their tritone substitution. So in the second measure, you'll notice instead of C minor 7, I have concert F sharp minor 7, tritone up. And then in the second half of the bar, instead of concert F7, I have that concert B7, the tritone substitution. So this is going to give us a little bit of a different sound than the last one because we are leaving that first measure intact. This is what it sounds like. So you can already hear that's going to give us a cool way to get around that progression. All right, let's hear the improvisation example over example number 2. So you can hear that gives a little bit of a different vibe, right? In example number 1, with each chord, it was going inside, outside, inside, outside. But in this one, the pattern is more inside, inside, outside, outside. And it's these subtle differences that really make your playing just so interesting if you have these subtle ways of manipulating how you're using tension and release and where you're using tension. Okay, so let's move on to example number 3. So what I've done in this one is I have taken out some chords. So you're going to hear it's a little bit more spread out, the harmony. But basically what I've done is I've taken the 6 chord and I've subbed that out for the entire first measure for the tritone substitution. And then I've taken the 5 chord in measure 2, and I have just subbed out the tritone of the 5 chord for the entire second measure. So this one is going to be really tense. You'll notice that there's really nothing that's inside, right? But the chords will also be a little bit more spread out. So for an entire measure, you'll hear me channeling that D flat 7 concert sound. And then for the entire second measure, you'll hear me playing that concert B7 sound. And then finally, I'll resolve to concert B flat major 7. So in effect, this is the sound that we're getting with this one. All right, let's go to the improvisation example on this one. Now you can hear that one is very different than any of the other ones that I've played so far. It's a little bit more open, but there's also a lot of tension in that. The tension is lasting the entire time. But it does give me an opportunity to do some cool stuff because the chords aren't changing every single 2 beats, or at least they're not changing in my mind every 2 beats. They still are changing in the rhythm section, which is what helps to give it that particular effect. All right, let's move on to our last example of the week. So in this one, I've gone ahead and subbed out every single chord in the entire 3-6-2-5 for its tritone substitution. So now what we get is concert A flat minor 7 to concert D flat 7 to concert F sharp minor 7 to concert B7, and then finally we resolve down to that B flat major. And this one's going to give a similar effect to the last line, but now I'm really trying to think about each one of those chords, which means I'm thinking about 4 chords, one every 2 beats, rather than being a little bit more open and thinking about 1 chord per measure. So here is what this progression is doing. So it's really giving you the effect of a 3-6-2-5 in E major, but then what I'm doing is I'm just resolving it to B flat major at the end, which is kind of a surprise a little bit. So here's some improvisation examples over this one. So you can hear there's just more consideration and more chord changes in that particular one, right? Like I'm really trying to play maybe a self-contained 2-5 over each measure. And you can really hear those chords changing in my playing. And it gives it that really tense effect because basically the entire line is clashing with what the rhythm section is doing. But then the beauty of it is it resolves at the end and everything. It's like you can finally exhale, take a breath. Feels good when that resolves, that tension and release that we always talk about on the show. All right, so there's some examples for you to start getting your ears wrapped around. Maybe you can start working on them in a very simple way. Remember, stick with triads and 1-2-3-5s. That's really going to pay off for you right now. You can transcribe those lines. Remember, if you're a Patreon member, you can get all those improvisation examples that I just played as separate audio files so that you can dive in and do whatever you want with them. Remember, you can always get in touch with me on the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group, or you can email me at 10minutejazzlesson.com. If you want to get signed up for the Patreon, which I highly recommend, you can go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up, and you get instant access to 298 episodes of material. As always, I hope you're all doing well out there, staying safe and healthy, and I really look forward to seeing you again next week. Have a great weekend, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye.